If you don't own something, you're not the boss. You have to take full responsibility for everything that you do. Why be subservient? You must be the master of your own kingdom.
I feel you. Makes a lot of sense.
You've got to own you can't just walk into things with your eyes half open. You've got to walk into things with your eyes fully open. You've got to know what you're getting into. You have to take possession of your life.
Is this a thought process that you have to constantly reaffirm, or
Yes,
is this cemented in
it's
your
exactly
head?
that. It's exactly that. You drift on this point.
Right.
And it is whatever form of meditation or mantra that you decide to espouse, there needs to be some period in your day where you remember that there's a world out there trying to tell you who you are, and there's a world in here that's trying to tell you who you are. Now, where do you want to put your eggs? Because the world outside is very noisy and very tempting, and it has all the razzmatazz, it has all the tinsel and all the glitter. It's got all the toys. But that's because you don't think you're enough in the first place. If you don't think you're enough in the first place, the whole idea of the world to sell you stuff is, first of all, they have to make you feel bad about yourself, less than in some way. And I don't resent this system, by the way. It is the system. But what's the expression about don't hate the player, hate the game? Don't hate the game. Love the game because you're in it, mate. So own the game, accept the rules, and move on into the rules. So the world will try and tell you who you are, and you have to tell yourself who you are. And there's this ongoing battle. And somehow there needs to be a reconciliation between the two. But in the end, you've got to have all the eggs in your basket.
There's also an ongoing internal battle, though, isn't there? There's the you that you want people to think you are, and there's the you who you are, and trying to figure out, like, how do I figure out who I am? Like, do I have a correct assumption of how the people are perceiving me and how I actually am objectively, or am I bullshitting the world with this suit and pocket square?
Yeah, I would say it's exactly the scenario that we're talking about. There's essentially only two worlds. There's the inner world of energy and there's the outer world of energy. There's two identities. One's real, one's false. The external world is, I'm asking you to tell me who I am. That's what we're all playing at. And as soon as you start playing that game, we run into all sorts of trouble. Call it the ego, call it whatever you want to call it. But that's the dynamic that we're in. And somehow we have to give ourselves enough confidence to reassure ourselves that we are enough. However, I enter the game because I've got to move on in the world. I've got to crack on in the world. And I know there's loads of temptations that can come along the way. So I will own the suit. I'm going to wear the suit, but I'm going to own the suit. Now, I don't mean by paying for it. I mean by owning it. It's now my suit. It's my idea to put on this suit. I have to personalize it in some way. I have to understand a narrative that allows me to own that suit. And thereby, I put on my suit of armor and I come out into the world. And guess what? I'm having a good time because I'm owning the suit.
Now, this is a very rock-solid philosophy. Is this something you've ever written down?
It's what the essence of narrative. I'm a storyteller. The essence of narrative is only about this dynamic. There is nothing else in a story other than this dynamic.
So the struggle between other people's perceptions and your own wants and desires and who you truly are, your significant real self.
That's it. That's all there is. You tell me a story that we engaged in, that's famous, that's not about this journey. I'll give you an example. The prodigal son. Parable, Christian, seems religious, doesn't really make much sense. Do you know the story?
Sure, but why don't you lay it out?
So there's a father. He has two sons, an older son, a younger son. And he says to them, who wants to spend their inheritance? The younger son says, me, Dad, I'll go and spend it. And the younger son takes all the dough and he runs off and sniffs coke off strippers' tits for a number of years until he realizes this is getting pretty boring and I'm in a lot of trouble. He ends up throwing food to pigs. That's his job. And he can't even eat the food that he gives to the pigs, at which point he says, Dad, will you take me back? Dad then they don't meet. This somehow happens, not through telephones, it just happens. At which point, Dad goes to the fatted calf, says, kill the fatted calf. Older son says, hold on, Dad, what's going on? I've stayed with you since the beginning. I've been loyal to you. And I hear the stories of my younger brother coming back, who's been sniffing coke off strippers' tits for the last God knows how many years. And you're prepared to kill the fatted calf. What's the SP, Dad? I want to know the story. He says, you're all right, son. Don't worry about that. You take a little step to the side. You'll always be with me. You're a good boy. At which point he goes out to meet the prodigal son, the wasteful son. The wasteful son returns and he says, you were lost and now you're found. That's the end of the story. It's quite hard to make sense of that in a literal sense. You go, oh, Dad was a bit unfair and you should have been kind to the older son because he never ran off and did anything. But the essence of the story is that you are the father. You are enough. Your older son is your intellect. He says, oh, don't do this, don't do that. He's trying to reconcile, make sense of a prosaic and material world. The younger son, being the wild, feral entity that he is, wants to go out in the world and find out what it's all about. So in his recklessness and sense of adventure, he finds that he can't escape himself. So he has to return to himself. And at which point, he has to accept who he is. At which point, the intellect is left out of the equation pretty much as the older brother, because he can't understand the significance of the journey of the wasteful brother. In the end, you have to leave yourself to understand the value of yourself. You have to lose stuff before you realize that all the stuff that you're losing is ephemeral and transitory. It's not yours. You're enough. You're always enough. But you've got to somehow prostitute yourself before you realize your own value. That is the essence of all stories.
That's deep, Guy Ritchie.